This podcast is brought to you by the Heldridge Hotel, New Brunswick's only 4-star hotel and a preferred hotel of Rutgers football fans. The Heldridge helps you make the most of your game day weekend, providing premium accommodations in the cultural heart of downtown New Brunswick. Restaurants, bars, theaters, parks, museums, and more are only steps away. Whether you're traveling alone or with a large group, book your stay at the Heldridge and make the most of your game day weekend. Visit theheldridge.com today.
The new podcast, In the Shadow of Princeton, starts as the matriarch of a prominent Princeton family is found stabbed to death in her locked basement. Investigators look from a serial attacker to her family to Princeton University students. One hot-blooded investigator sees a conspiracy. Is he way off base, or does privilege let you get away with murder? In the Shadow of Princeton is available wherever you get podcasts, or you can binge it ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politti and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Rant. Politti here, Lanny, Fonseca, oh boy. 35-32 loss to UCLA. Going to call this the call your shot game. Will be forever known as that. Never have I seen a game like that where there's so much to talk about. And then a press conference that eclipsed the game. It was kind of a wild thing. If you guys aren't, if you listeners here aren't from following this stuff as closely, I understand if you left that game at halftime and decided to erase it from your memory banks before anything happened. But the press conference was really fascinating. Greg Schiano ended it. You know, we're all done, set the scene. We're all in the room. We're getting ready to finish up. Last question. He's done. And then he just says, I got one more thing. And it was really just a very telling moment, I thought. And I hope we're not overestimating, we're putting too much into it. But, you know, he came up and said, look, you know, we're going to get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. And you call your shot right now if you don't think we're going to get there. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing it, obviously. But it was the call your shot moment where he was challenging doubters to come out and talk against this program. And I just thought it was fascinating given what had happened for 3.5 hours before he got in there. What did you guys make of it? I mean, when you had a chance to process it now for 48 hours, what are your thoughts?
So here's my thought, right? I think Greg Schiano understands the gravity of this loss and how it's going to be perceived by the fan base and by us. I think he didn't read our stories, obviously, but I think he was probably told that my writing Panic in Piscataway, Pat, you know, pondering whether this is the worst team in the Big Ten, and he understands kind of the direction of the talking points and how we're going to talk about this team after this loss, which is, I mean, we can argue about this, but maybe the worst loss that he's had since coming back for his second stint. And I think he was kind of ready to kind of defend and say that the sky isn't falling and everything isn't exactly, you know, the season isn't exactly over. I'll read you the quote right now. Okay. I'll just close with this, guys.
I was just looking up. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I'll just close with this, guys. We will get there. This program will get there. I know that there are going to be certain people, wink, wink, Steve Stoliti, that will want to cast their ballots and say, oh, we got big problems. You call your shot. Just remember, we will get there. I promise you. So you want to call your shot now? Just call it. But know that you're calling your shot. This program will be just fine. Thank you. He was polite at the end and said thank you. And listen, I think here's my interpretation. I think he was prepared for a question akin to like big picture. Is the season falling apart after 3 straight losses? And to be honest, that was my next question. If I had gotten the opportunity to ask a second question, and no one asked that question, so I guess he just he was prepared to answer the question. It wasn't asked, and he said, "By golly, I'll answer it anyway." And he kind of just put that out there. Which, listen, I think you can view it from 2 different ways. To me, I think it's very clearly trying to outwardly project some confidence and kind of, you ever see the gif of the guy with the exploding house in the background and he's like, everything is fine, please disperse. I think it's kind of like that. I think he's trying to, you know, water down the fire that is burning around the program because we've talked about it. I think the fan base feels this way. This season, essentially, the special season is over, and now you like I wrote in my film review, you went from the brink of a breakout season to now you're kind of begging to make a bowl game.
Yeah, I think the call your shot moment is going to be remembered because of what else is happening in the Big Ten around Rutgers. Rutgers came into the season, like Brian just mentioned, thinking that this would be the year with all the experience back, a veteran defense, an easier schedule, optimism to parlay the momentum of last season. And now that has kind of gone away, right? But if you look around the conference, Indiana just routed Nebraska. Indiana has a first-year coach, Curt Cignetti, doing wonderful things for that program, complete turnaround in 1 year. So that's a rebuild that happened like that. Maryland beat USC on Saturday. Illinois is ranked. There are just so many things that as a Rutgers fan, you would want to say that we're not there in year 5. How much longer do we have to wait? Right. This was the promised year. This is when things are supposed to be good, and it's still not good. Yeah. So that's, I guess, the counter to the shot.
Yeah. And if he is talking to us, which I'm not convinced he's talking to us, if he's talking to us, I mean, I got to tell you guys, we're not the Washington press corps here, right? It's like the three of us. Okay. We get negative when they lose. And it's Chris from Gannett, it's the Daily Targum, it's a couple of recruiting sites, and a couple of guys who are every game. I still don't know where they were. There's like 10 of us in that room. I mean, I don't know. The criticism is what it is, and I get it. And whatever I wrote, let me just tell you, like I get email, I interact with people, and other than one very solid Shiano guy, like I didn't get any email saying, "Oh, you go back off." Whoa, hey, that's a little harsh. Like everything was the same tone of the like. I agree totally. We got like 90 texts in our text messages, and everyone on fire the same way. It's just, and I think it is that part of it that Greg Schiano does not understand, that we will get there. People are tired of hearing that nonsense. It is year 5. Like we've chopped the wood. Right? The wood, there's a pile of wood back there now. The wood's chopped. I don't know what to tell you. The pipeline's full. It's year freaking 5. People are tired of it. They want to just come to the game, homecoming, and get your doors blown up by a bad UCLA team. It's just like, I don't, and you're right, Pat, to that point. Indiana, Illinois, and we're going to talk about this later with the NIL stuff that's become the new thing. But for the most part, it's just like, all right, well, when then? We'll get there when? If you don't get there this year or next year, looking at the roster, look at the schedule. Like I totally get it. And it's not that, and the people he's talking to, if he's talking to me, if he's talking to boosters, if he's talking to, I don't know, are people who threw their lot in on Greg Schiano and said, this is it. This is the guy. This is the guy who must do it. I think there's like a level of frustration, like, what the heck? I think that was a feeling that I know I had. I think a lot of other people had it too.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points that anyone defending the Rutgers side will probably bring up. One, the unbelievable amount of injuries. This team is absolutely decimated. You had your starting defensive ends are out. One starting linebacker is out for the year. Another one is playing clearly dinged up. Both your starting quarterbacks were questionable, and they have been dinged up. You lose your left guard. You lose your top 2 tight ends. That is a lot of injuries that you have to overcome. To your point, with the pipeline, you think that in year 5, 4 recruiting classes, the transfer portal, you would have built some depth that could withstand and maybe not play to the same level, but not have such a huge drop off. And that plays to the second point, which is NIL. I think Pat mentioned correctly, Indiana is the sensation team in the Big Ten. They have completely transformed from a 3-9 going nowhere program for their entire history to having college game day coming right now. They're 7-0. They could win the Big Ten. They could legitimately win the Big Ten in year 1 under Curt Cignetti. Rutgers will tell you that I shouldn't say, the argument would be that they had a significant NIL commitment for football in Curt Cignetti's first year that Rutgers just does not have, and that plays a factor. And I think that is part of Greg Schiano's call your shot and kind of the sky isn't falling, because if the sky is falling and everything's going away, why would boosters want to throw in money to this program, right? So I think it's kind of just calming the waters and saying continue bringing in the money, because if you don't get the NIL, you're struggling to compete now with whatever NIL you have. If that faucet shuts out, then you're kind of heading even further into the bottom of the Big Ten. So I think those 2 things are what Rutgers defenders would say. I can understand the injury thing to a certain extent, because I mean, you look at the list of guys that they're missing. It's insane for a top heavy team as far as talent, but even then, I still don't think you should lose to UCLA at home.
Yeah. The NIL thing, and I want to jump in here because like I totally understand it, but I also feel like the goalposts are moving, right? Because we were told for 3 years Rutgers needed the NIL money to retain its best players, and last year Rutgers retained every single one of those players and went out and got a quarterback and went out and got a number 1 receiver. That was my take on NIL. If now the NIL thing is like, well, we need NIL because we don't have backups. Well, that's not what the program was supposed to be. The program was supposed to be, we are going to recruit like hell. We're going to develop these players. And when they get on the field, the linebackers who replace the injured Tyrone Powell will know how to defend a running back coming out of the backfield. Like, right? I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that was that's what I saw. I saw Rutgers.
That's spot on, yeah.
Rutgers is a developmental program. I saw the guys who are supposed to be development. The new guys come in. The players come in. Like, I saw arm tackles. I just saw stuff that just not a good football team does. You know, I mean, that's my takeaway. Like, so, okay, so if it's changing now that the NIL is necessary to buy a roster, Rutgers is never going to win that game. Never.
And how many times have we heard we only use the transfer portal to bolster our roster, to bring in the right people, to plug holes, and that's the philosophy and the things that Greg Schiano preaches time and time again. It has to be the right fit, whether it's recruiting, transfer portal, development. There are the right guys for Rutgers, right? So to your point, Steve, like, the goalpost is moving 100 yards at this point, if that's going to be an excuse, right? The depth was supposed to be better. That was the reason why Rutgers collapsed at the end of last year, right? The depth was not good enough. That was what Greg Schiano said was a big part of it. And it's worse this year. It's worse this year.
Yep, I would agree. The lack of development in the younger guys, the clear drop off between 1s and 2s is just, I mean, it's stark. It's stark, and it's a big reason why they're struggling so much right now. But that again, I asked Greg Schiano, this is a developmental program. They pride themselves on being a developmental program. He said that every program is a developmental program to an extent, but if you're going to pride yourself on being a developmental program, you got to develop guys. Moses Walker is a 3rd-year, 4-star linebacker, and he's lost on the field. Not to single this guy out, but he's just the one example that comes to mind where, I mean, you think a guy who's in his 3rd year at a position like that, learning from guys like Mo Toure and Tyrone Powell, even if those 2 guys weren't banged up, he would play significant snaps this year, and he just cannot. Right. For multiple of those big plays with running backs and tight ends just was not in the right position. And him is the same for a lot of guys I can name, but again, that was just the first name that came to mind.
Yeah, no one's just, it's not a walk-on. Like, they're not digging into, we had to bring out a 3rd-year chemistry student to play linebacker. I mean, it's a 4-star linebacker. A lot of other things in that press conference. We were again going back through it. Both you and I, Brian, had sort of moments where Greg clearly was not happy with our questions, and I think pushing back, which is fine. Like, I like that. I think it's, it is part of the process. I don't want to get coach speak. I want someone to challenge me if I'm wrong. And it might be that it's funny. My question and what infuriates me, this is the 2nd straight game where I felt like I was focused on the leaky faucet when the floodwaters were wiping away the neighborhood, forget the house. But again, the 2-point conversion thing was just, to me, like, I just didn't get it. I've seen this team play, and I've seen it in Nebraska need 2 yards on 6 plays and can't get it. Right. Like, I've just seen what this team, I don't think this team has converted the 2-point conversion. I don't know that it's just the whole thing to me. When you cut the lead from 21-10 to 21-16 and you go for 2 there, it's just, you're chasing points early in the game and you don't have a high percentage of getting them. Was my point. I asked him about it, and I got it's basic math thing. And it was a very long answer. He wants to teach me analytics. I know analytics. I get it. I went in and looked. He's right. Analytics alone, the odds say go for 2 that situation. Even early in the 3rd quarter, that's great. He's coaching his team, though. This is his team. I've seen his team. And to the point, and it's funny, someone brought it up, to the 2-point, he needed 2 yards. He was at the UCLA 48-yard line. He needed 2 yards on a 4th and 2 and punted. So he knows his team. Like, right? That's another analytic situation. If you're okay, well, go for it. Again, it's a small thing, but it just struck me as like just another game management thing that he's just throwing craps. He's crapping out on all these decisions. Brian, he was angry at you, but the asking about tackles, or not angry, it's not the right word. Pushback. You were asking about depth and the tackles, right?
I was asking about the drop off between, and to his point, he was right. I asked 4 different questions. I botched my question. I fully hand up. I messed that one up.
You didn't chop the question.
I did not chop the question. I chopped the question too much. It was very much choppy. I just couldn't figure out how to word the question, which essentially was, is he concerned about the drop off in the second string guys from the first string guys, the drop off when you have to go into your depth when the first string guys are injured? And he said he's concerned with the second string guys, and in some cases the third string guys, essentially saying, like, for example, tight end, you're on your third string guy. So again, I understand that. To your point about the decision making, right? I think the going for 2 was completely justified by the math. I think it's not a bad decision at all, but I am confused on the aggressiveness, not aggressive, the not going for 4th and 2 at midfield after you have a draw play on 3rd and 10 that gets you close enough. Later in the game, you go for it on 4th and 9 and convert. Chris Long gets absolutely smacked when he catches the ball down the middle. Yeah. Credit to him. That was a huge play. But I'm just confused on is this team aggressive? Is it situational? And then to make it worse, after you punt on 4th and 2 at midfield, UCLA goes for it on 4th and 1 at their own 18-yard line. And they convert it and then score a touchdown later on in that drive. Just that juxtaposition was pretty stark. And I'm just confused as far as, like, is this team being aggressive? Is it purely following the math? Because I think a 4th and 2 near midfield in a game where you're apparently not going to have a lot of possessions, according to his calculations, because of UCLA's NFL offense, you'd think you'd go for it on 4th and 2 in midfield. You're moving the ball decently well. I don't know. I'm just confused. The decisions individually can be justified, but the trend, the thought process, the feel, the aggressiveness they're calling these was, I just can't really decipher.
The game management issue, that blunder beyond the 2-point conversion that's just gotten completely swept under the carpet, is the decision to call a timeout with 22 seconds left after the sack. That instead of saying, we just got our doors blown off in this first half, we have some momentum back, let's just ride this out. Schiano calls timeout, gives UCLA the opportunity to drive down the field, and they score a touchdown, erases everything, right? That one's also mind-numbing.
Yeah, it just, especially given the way the defense looked, a lot of people pointed that one out to me. Absolutely, yeah. We gotta get, you'd be happy to go in with the score at that point to halftime, and instead it's a great point.
To be clear. We cannot micromanage and nitpick these decisions. Rutgers lost this game because its defense could not tackle a ghost. It could not tackle anybody. It could not get to the quarterback. It could not cover receivers. It could not cover running backs. They were completely in the wrong position on so many plays. The linebacker position is just a mess, again, because of the lack of depth. Motoré and Tyron Powell, when healthy, might have been one of the best linebacker duos in the Big Ten. This backup core is just not filling in at all. Like they're struggling mightily. I thought, on the offensive end, Taj White had a good game, his best game so far. The tight ends did pretty well, Logan Blake and Mike Higgins for Kenny Fletcher and Victor Konopka. But defensively, just a complete mess. And UCLA had a decent passing attack, but Ethan Garbers, as you wrote, Steve, looked like Troy Aikman. And, I mean, these guys were just running all over Rutgers in the short passing game.
You did it in the film review, Pat. And this, I don't know if you looked at it. It's Brian has a bunch of just clips of missed tackles, just arm tackles, blown tackles. But for me, what's amazing in that, mixed into that, there's a missed tackle, but then the TV camera shows that it's the Garbers runs to his left, and then you look to your right, and there's just the UCLA running back all by himself on the other side of the field. So Rutgers is missing tackles over here with extra guys because there's one guy that's completely unblocked. And they're circling. You would never think to look over that. I don't know who did the game. They were circling it on the TV. Like, oh my gosh, like that. Yeah, okay.
Well, that's what I wanted to point out in my story, that when you think about this, it was Eric Bieniemy, who's been so lauded as an NFL coach, an offensive play caller, right? Mm-hmm. All these things, and what you saw was a little bit of that Kansas City Chiefs offense where they throw the ball short, yards after catch are super important. And Garbers was incredible at executing it, but Rutgers was awful at defending it. And that's what brings me back to this point. It was Bieniemy's offense versus Schiano's defense, two guys that are very known for having identities, and Bieniemy just blew Schiano away in terms of coaching. I thought that was totally unbelievable dichotomy of coaching in that game.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it seemed, the way the Kenny Fletcher play worked a lot against Virginia Tech, it looked like UCLA kept running this concept where they had 3 wide receivers on one side, would clear one side, and then on the other end, the tight end or a running back would fill in the space and be wide open. And once they were in space, I mean, the guys just could not tackle anybody. Yeah. I mean, that was actually the second most missed tackles Rutgers has had in a game, believe it or not. They had 15 against, I want to say Washington. And I think they had 3 against Wisconsin. So it's not like this has been a season-long issue, but in the games where it's bad, it's just been catastrophic. And the running back that was open, by the way, was Jalen Berger, who later scored a touchdown in the second half. The announcers were saying that they really wanted to give him a touchdown in his home state. And I don't think they force-fed him. I just think they found an opportunity where he was so open, he eventually scored.
Right. All right. I'm going to shift it to some positives because there were some. I think the one that we're not talking about enough because of the result was Kyle Monangai coming back into that game. He got destroyed on a play. It looked like that was it for him. Came into the game, not came into the game, but really in the third quarter, I thought we were going to be writing the guy who saved the season for Rutgers just by the way he showed the toughness, scored a touchdown, had a couple big runs. I mean, if you were not inspired by seeing him and to set the scene, and I like he was not allowed to talk about what he got injured, ribs in whatever, something happened in his midsection. He was hunched over when he was talking to us, like it looked like
sitting
down, looked like he was still in pain. Give that kid just a tremendous amount of credit. And the offense, Athan was great. It was not great. Athan was very good. He made a lot of good throws, some deep throws, got a lot of guys involved. Was it his best game as quarterback? Might be.
Yeah, it might be. And one other thing worth mentioning too is what we've seen is that there are 2 guys that are legitimately going to be really good players at Rutgers that are young guys. You see it with Ian Strong every week. He is a big time playmaker. He makes that 45-yard catch right out of the gate. And then similarly, they come from the same high school. They got the same build. KJ Duff is in the same making. And you saw him break out in that game late in the second half. So they are playing some young guys on offense that are making a difference. So yeah, between those guys, they definitely deserve a shout out. The young tight ends, as Brian mentioned before, Mike Higgins and Logan Blake also played pretty well. Didn't have any catches, but I know definitely had some impact. And overall, the way that Monangai rallied them and the way Athan spread the ball around, it was just one of those days where you're like, okay, the offense is there and the defense is abysmal. And it was the opposite in Nebraska where the defense had its best game in the second half and the offense couldn't do anything. It's just Rutgers has never put together a complete game in any aspect this season. And I guess if there's hope for change or turnaround in the back half of the season, it's that. Like, let's get all of our units playing well in one game because that just hasn't happened in 7 games yet.
Rutgers might have to start winning games by shootout. Athan said essentially that he looks at it as I didn't put enough points up on the board. And I think the way the defense is playing, unless there's a huge turnaround here, they've given up 77 points in the last 2 games. That's more than any 2-game stretch they had last year. And again, unless there's a fix here, I think they're going to have to win in shootouts. And I think, again, to your point, Saturday was encouraging. I don't know if it was Athan's best game, but it was definitely one of his best. He had more passes of 40 or more yards. He had 2 passes of 40 or more yards against UCLA. He had 3 in the first 6 games combined. So he's clearly showing an ability to throw the ball deep. Like you said, the young receivers are emerging. I thought Dymere Miller had one of his better games, just constantly getting opening and getting those nickel and dime, 10 yards, 15-yard gains to kind of move the chains. Christian Dremel got targeted a couple times. He was in the starting lineup. Not to pat ourselves in the back here, but I think anyone who watched that last game would know that he deserved more playing time, and he played well. I thought, obviously caught both balls that were thrown at him. And I think the tight end part of the passing attack is kind of gone. I don't think Mike Higgins and Logan Blake can do what Kenny Fletcher was doing, but they at least can block. And like I said, the offensive line, which I have ripped the last 2 weeks as a house of cards that crumbled without Brian Felter, they had a really good game. They've only given up 1 sack in the past 2 games. Taj White looks comfortable after kind of having to assimilate in the first couple games. So I think the offense looks good. But to Pat's point, this Jekyll and Hyde, like some days the offense looks great, some days they don't, some days the defense looks good. They don't. I don't know. I don't know what this team is. Right.
Yeah, it was just 3 weeks ago. We were in Nebraska. They 7 points. We're like this offense. I thought we were done with days like this. You're right.
Exactly. Exactly. And conversely, you're like the defense held them to 0 first downs in the second half, 2 yards per play, shutout, and you're like they got it finally figured out, and then they come back and give up 42 points to Wisconsin, and then or even worse against UCLA. So it's just like you cannot figure. Last year, you knew exactly what Rutgers team you were getting every time they stepped on the field. Right. They may not have been as good as Michigan or Penn State, but you knew what was going to show up. This year, you have no idea. You just have no idea. And
the thing with the defense that I want to bring up, no game-changing plays, no interceptions. Keontae Hamilton, to be fair, at the back end had an amazing play where he sacks the quarterback and forces a fumble and recovers it himself. That gave them some life at the end. It was too little too late. But Ethan Garbers threw at least 1 interception in every game this season. His touchdown to interception ratio coming in, I think, was 5-9 or 4-9. I believe it was 5-9. They didn't get 1 interception. And that's just been a theme this entire season. They're just not making these, aside from Eric Rogers' pick 6 against Howard, I can't remember a big, and same thing on special teams. Special teams was great, very solid. It didn't make that game-changing play this team needs. Again, they don't need points. This wasn't a game where Rutgers was lacking points, but I still think they needed to get a stop defensively, get an interception, just a timely big play. And aside from that 3-and-out to start the second half, it just wasn't there.
All right. Should we do some questions? Because we had like 80 of them. I mean, people, I made a comment on the text service. I'm like, all right, do we want to do this? Want to just move on? And people did not want to move on. They're like, yes, I've got my pitchfork here. I've got some questions. All right, let's start with a lot of Shiano questions. I think we addressed the press conference. We should move on from that. A lot of people didn't like it. That was a theme. It was very un-Shiano-like lecturing the fans and media. That was the theme. I heard a bunch of it. Someone asked how difficult it is to cover Rutgers when Shannon never asks questions. Well, it's not. I mean, he gives you stuff. It's very easy when a coach fills your notebook with stuff like that. He wrote my column for me. But this is one that's come up at least 6 times here in the texts. Warm seat. Is Greg Schiano's seat officially warm? Even if it was, who can make a change with an outgoing president and interim AD? Peter in Palm City, was he tested yesterday because he fears the new AD may have a coach or 2 in his back pocket? I'm going to say this as loud as I possibly can. No, Greg Schiano's seat is not warm. He doesn't have a boss. His boss doesn't have a boss. The hypothetical guy who would fire him has to be hired by a hypothetical guy. He's got no. This is not it. They've lost. They're 4-3 in a universe where you take a step back and look at it. You're like, oh, okay. They're, just stop. There's no sign for 2023. He's the guy. That's it. I mean, this is it. He is the coach. I don't know what to tell you. Either he gets it done or we'll talk in 3 or 4 years. What about leadership within the program?
I'm sure there's darts to be thrown at the offensive play calling by Kirk Shiraka. The defense, we've sung Joe Harrison praises the last couple of years. This year, obviously that unit has taken a big step back. I still feel very confident that the leadership of this football team is under no pressure at this point.
I think what Pat Hobbs said was correct. Greg Schiano will be the coach at Rutgers for as long as he wants. I think that is absolutely true. The only person that will fire Greg Schiano is Greg Schiano. And that'll be true for many years.
Who's this Pat Hobbs fella you're bringing up here? Oh, not familiar with that name.
I read about him in the New York Post the other day. Some salacious details in that story.
That was titillating. Very fascinating in the tabloids. Where'd they get that stuff from? I'm sorry.
Some loser investigative reporters in New Jersey. But anyway, even if Rutgers goes 4-8, right? Greg Schiano's under no pressure, no danger. Even in if this wasn't Greg Schiano, if it was Coach Smith, whatever, you could point to injuries, decimated the season, you get a mulligan, right? But this is Greg Schiano at Rutgers. Even if they go 4-8 for the next 5 years, I don't think he'll get fired. I think the more likely thing, there are only 2 ways I see it that Greg Schiano stops being the head coach of Rutgers. He retires in, who knows how many years. Could be next year, could be 10 years from now. Neither would surprise me. Or, and this is a wild card, and I think I brought this up a few months ago, Greg Schiano becomes the athletic director of Rutgers University and allows one of his subordinates, be that Kirk Shiraka, be that Joe Harris-Simiak, to become the head coach.
So Greg Schiano wants a demotion. Is that what you're saying?
He wants the $5 million pay cut. Is what
he wants. He wants a pay cut and demotion, and he wants to sit in a meeting where he can listen to gymnasts complain about a toxic environment on their team. I don't know. Okay, maybe.
I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying the Barry Alvarez model it has created precedent, and I don't know. Maybe you get to the end of the year, you're 4-8. The NIL situation is what it is. You look at what the Big Ten is, you see no path forward, and you say, I'll become the athletic director. I don't think it's going to happen, to be clear. I do not think it's likely. I don't think it's impossible. This is just me speculating here.
Yep.
I don't think it's impossible.
It's a dart at the dartboard. Totally.
Otherwise, he will not be fired. I mean, I understand people asking the question because the season is going down the tubes.
No,
he's not going to.
It shouldn't be. And shouldn't be. Let's say that as well. And should not be on the hot seat. Let's just stop. And when I think people see, when I criticize him in the short term, I'm reacting to something that happened in a game. That does not mean I don't think he should still be the coach. I was thinking about it. Did this again? There couldn't have been more all in on him in 2019. I was thinking, did this waver my belief that he was the right hire? Maybe for the first time, I was like, all right, is he going to get it done? But it doesn't change my belief that in 2019 he was the right person to hire. I know it did shake me to think, I don't know if he's going to pull this off. I did think that after this UCLA game. I did not think that going back in time, Rutgers should have hired Butch Jones. I don't think that, Brett another name I can't pronounce. Bielema was here, it would be a completely different thing. I didn't think that. So let's just keep that in mind. We're not revising history here.
I agree. I think everyone agrees that at that time, at that place, the only correct hire was Greg Schiano. I 100%. Well, not all of us. There, the aforementioned Pat Hobbs.
There's one person.
Yeah,
I wonder what he's doing in Basking Ridge, if he's watching these games or if he's
or watching our podcast. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
hey, Pat, if you're watching this podcast, give me a call. Got my number.
But I will say
a couple questions for you.
I'm with you. I'd like to get your Pat's take on this as well. I'd like to know what there is. He says we'll get there. Now, what is there, and what would be the there?
So good.
What would be the there
so
that makes fans happy? Rutgers, when at the end of his first stint, when it was a perennial 7, 8, occasional 9-win team, reaching bowl games, people felt like the program plateaued. Is that where Rutgers wants to be back? Or is there a 1 10-win season that we thought this year could have been? What is there? And I know the answer will probably be the program is at a point of stability where we can regularly win and make bowl games and occasionally challenge. Maybe that's as far as they'll go. What do you guys think? To you, what would be there that you say, okay, the program has made it to a point where I will accept it being there?
I think it's a championship season, right? You win the Big Ten, you're number one. That's it. That's the only there. Everything else is a joke.
That's not my there, but okay. Yeah, that's great. And it's funny though. You mentioned that, Brian. It's my question to that, we will get there was, well, when, but where? It might be just as good a question. That is really funny.
It is good.
Todd, do you really think that it's this championship is the there? Or why else bother?
Because he always he didn't do it this time, but right. He always says, we got to number 6, right? We almost got there. So I think in his mind, it's we have to be in the top 5 competing for a national championship. That's it.
He did say he came back to Rutgers to win a championship. I will give you that, Pat. I think that from a long-term standpoint, right? I think you'd want to have a program that's in Iowa, a Wisconsin, a stable. You win 8 games, 4 out of 5 years, and the 5th year you're 9-0 and top 10 team competing for a Big Ten title. I think that's
the ceiling. That is the absolute ceiling for me. I think yes.
But is that there?
That is the aspirational, holy trinity. If you can get to that point, I think there for me is that you were a competitive team every week. They're basically there now at that point. And you go to bowl, you're in a bowl game every year, and there is a point where you have that season. This was supposed to be that season. Like if this team went 9-3 and you had that really nice season and you're in Florida and you're at the Citrus Bowl, then I think people could say, oh, okay. This is what, like, I don't know. Like it's a reasonable place. That's not we need to be in the playoff and competing. Like no one's judging them on that curve. It's the fact they might go 4-8 to me. That's like, that's the problem this year.
The Citrus Bowl sent 2 representatives to the game, by the way. I don't think they're going to give Rutgers a bid, just so you know.
I saw them. Yeah.
I haven't talked to them.
They did it in the press conference as well.
Did they really?
They were in there. Yeah.
I didn't see that in their Blazers.
Yeah, I think they took them off. Maybe. I don't know.
Up there.
Maybe that's who Greg Schiano was talking to. Is the Citrus Bowl reps.
That's good. All right. We had a lot of more questions on NAL. I think we covered it a little bit, but there's a couple points. Mike from South Jersey had a really good point. Like, clearly there's a depth issue for starters, even on 1B, whatever. We heard a lot about the NA issues. Is the impending revenue sharing something that will alleviate the financial burden and allow Rutgers to bring in more depth pieces? This is a fascinating question. If you don't follow this, I don't know where it stands now, Brian. You probably better feel it than I do. But the House settlement, there was going to be a point where there's a revenue sharing with the players. There'd be $22 million, I think was what the latest number was, that they would spend. Everyone would have that money to spend on players and divided how they see fit. I think that certainly would alleviate some of it, depending on how Rutgers divides that pie. The problem is, all right, is there a cap on what everybody else is spending? I guess we haven't gotten to the point where I've seen it, at least, where there's going to be a fixed amount of money that colleges spend on players, right?
I don't think they will ever be able to legislate the amount of legitimate name, image, and likeness money a player makes, right?
Right.
In theory, you can go to Wisconsin and be sponsored by Spotted Cow. The NCAA can't stop you. Well, I guess that's an alcohol. They can stop you there. But you know what I'm saying? A local car dealership, they can't stop the dealership from giving you an NIL payout, right? So
right.
I don't know. And I think this stuff is still being ironed out. I don't think the administrators know. I think this is still a lot in the dark. I think it will help, right? It'll alleviate some pressure from the donors to have to, pick up the tab like they are now. But I think as long as there will be college football, there will be programs that will try to go the extra mile to pay the best players in the country extra money. And I think that as long as that's the case, Rutgers will never really be in the case for those elite players, unless one of you guys wins the Mega Millions or somebody opens the next wave, like the next oil, hits an oil pipe in their backyard. I think this is kind of where Rutgers is going to be in the NIL landscape for the rest of time, essentially. But the revenue share will help. How much? Mm-hmm. If I had to guess, not too much.
It's a fascinating point. I have seen this written a bunch of times that Rutgers is in the college sports is in the in-between. It was once here. It is going here. It is now here. And right. So we haven't gotten there yet. The other side of it.
That's a good way to put it. Yep.
All right. This one came up a bunch of times. And I'm surprised it wasn't in your film review, but why was Schiano yelling at Joe Susan at the end of the game? Wasn't the end of the game. It was I thought somewhere in the middle of the game. I don't know. People sending me the clip. It is pretty outrageous. And I like Joe Susan. If you don't know, he's like a father figure to Greg Schiano, who's around Greg Schiano 1.0. Just a good, solid dude who's there. I think during the game, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he is helping with substitutions during the game.
That I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but clearly dressed him down on the sideline. We didn't have time to ask. I don't know what happened there. It was, to me, I don't know, just kind of a sign of like Greg Schiano was on edge during that game, and that was, clearly that was to me a sign of it manifesting in dressing down one of his best lieutenants. So I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I don't either. But Joe Susan, to your point, local guy from South River, also was a head coach at Bucknell while Schiano was gone, came back. Schiano brought him back. He left a head coaching job at Bucknell to be the special assistant to the head coach is his official title.
Right. I'm fairly certain he was Greg Schiano's head coach at Bucknell at one point. I know he was on the staff when Greg Schiano was at Bucknell. Mm-hmm. I think Greg Schiano is tightly wound at every game, at every sideline. Again, it doesn't matter who the opponent is. I think there's been clips of him yelling at assistants, every game pretty much. Last week he was yelling at the two defensive line coaches during the clown car substitutions. So it's just a matter of when the Big Ten network camera is going to catch him doing that. I don't think I've ever seen him yell at Joe Susan. Joe Susan is a special assistant to the head coach. I think he's there as a consultory person on the sideline, much like his son is with the spreadsheets and helping him make analytical decisions. I think Joe Susan is there kind of as a sounding board of the sideline. Maybe Joe Susan made a bad decision. Maybe Greg is just angry at something and he needs to yell his anger at somebody, and Joe Susan just happened to be 2 feet away from him. I'm not sure. But I wouldn't characterize it as entirely out of character for Greg Schiano, if I'm being honest.
All right. We've done the questions, the changes. People want to know, and this is maybe you can handle this one, Pat. Josh in Arlington, Virginia had a really good detailed question about what to do schematically. What changes can be made at defense that even make our limited with personnel situations? Can you switch to a base 3-4? Your D linemen aren't playing well enough. We just somehow clean up the short plays over the middle. Extra linebacker safety hybrid would help with that. Heck, a 2-5. It's just interesting, like throwing things against the wall. To me, and this what makes this interesting to me is now you're going to go and I just think you're going to get your absolutely destroyed by Southern Cal, and you're going to come back 4-4. You have a week off. You're going to get guys back, presumably. Is there something schematically that can change there before those final 4 games?
I was watching Rutgers use more linebackers in the game against UCLA, and they were not keeping up with the skill and the speed of the running backs. So I think Rutgers was playing more traditional 4-3, taking a defensive back off the field to put an extra linebacker in there, which is what you usually do to stop the run. But in this case, it didn't really pan out because they couldn't match the speed of the running backs. Right. Yeah. Long story short, I don't foresee any schematical changes, especially with the personnel at the moment, the way people are injured, and trying to change the scheme at this point would be more confusing and set this program back more, in my opinion. Yeah. So I don't foresee any schematic changes, but they were definitely trying to make in-game switches in arrangement and schemes in that game against UCLA for sure. Just none of it worked because of poor tackling, as Brian said.
Yeah, right. Rutgers used 22 different defensive players against UCLA.
Is that right? Wow.
I didn't go back and see if that was more than any other game this season, but it felt like they used all 22 in the first drive where, like you said, Pat, they were just throwing a bunch of guys on the field. Timmy Heinz-Peter was in the game. DJ Allen played a few snaps. They were just kind of throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick, and obviously nothing did. So I think they're trying. I don't think they're going to change schematics, to Pat's point. Like, some of these guys don't seem to understand the current defense. I don't know how they would understand a new defense middle of the season, right? So I don't think that's the solution. I think they're just going to kind of try to find guys that can execute what they do now to a higher level. And listen, again, Taj White gives them some hope that a guy who is not playing much can kind of play and adapt, and with every passing game, get more comfortable. But yeah, I just don't think wholesale changes are coming.
There's just a lot. I mean, defense just, and the play that sticks out again was the Garber's 49-yard touchdown run for me, because it wasn't just that Igmanosin blew a tackle that would have been a 3-yard loss. When Garber's takes off, not a running quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. This is an offense that averaged 14 points a game. He takes off running, and you just see, and I just watching it unfold, I'm like, it just seemed like the players on the field were running in pudding. Like, there was just a speed issue to getting to him that was just kind of alarming. And like the rest of the day, it just felt like, I think UCLA was missing its top 2 receivers or 2 of its best receivers, at least. Certainly seemed like everyone was open on UCLA. I mean, you complete 84% of passes. You threw 40 times. Yeah. There's no scheme that's good.
But none of them were like, Wisconsin threw the ball really well down the field against Rutgers. Cornerbacks were getting beat. The safeties were getting beat. Against UCLA, it was short passes, in the 0 to 5 yard range that just became 30, 40 yard gains because Rutgers couldn't tackle. 223 yards after the catch. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
258 according to PFF, which is even worse.
Wow.
Incredible.
And look, again, I think, and the one of the few passes Ethan Garbers missed, ironically, was a deep ball on the first drive. Guy was wide open, just overthrew him a little bit. Again, I think Robert Longerbeam and Eric Rogers were playing dinged up to a significant level. Like they couldn't run. Robert Longerbeam on the first missed tackle of the game almost didn't seem to fully. I don't know if he was trying to strip the ball or what, but it seemed like he was kind of hesitant. And Greg Schiano mentioned this in his presser, right? Like, if you've never played defensive football, you don't understand, and you'll never understand what it's like to try to tackle when you're hurt. It's not a video game. You can't just press a button and tackle, which fair enough. And I think that clearly was an issue for some of these guys. Robert Longerbeam stuck out to me. Flip Dixon doesn't seem to be hitting as hard as he was last year. He's been dealing with, a nagging injury all year. And who was I? Tyron Powell, great to start the game. Seemed to kind of wear down as the game went on. He's got to be, he came back 7 months after an Achilles tear. It feels like he's kind of overcompensating maybe because of that. And it's, again, just a cascade of issues that are getting in Rutgers' way.
Right. All right. The last football question, then we're going to do some basketball stuff because we've got some basketball to talk about. Win again. This is from Rocco. I am not hopeful that we will win another game. Do you agree? And if not, which games do you think we will win? Just said I do not think you're going to win in Los Angeles this weekend, although everyone else seems to be winning in Los Angeles. Well, I mean, Maryland went out there and beat Southern Cal. I just think that's a bad matchup.
Maryland. It was at Maryland.
Oh, was that Maryland? Okay.
Yeah, and the Terps stormed the field.
Terps stormed the field. Of course. Why not? Storm the field. 4, that gives you 4. Unless maybe you guys will tell me if you're going to pick. We'll save that for later in the week if one of you going to pick Rutgers to beat Southern Cal. But then you've got the 4 games left, and they're all, we've said it a million times, they're all toss-up games. Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State. The problem is if you look at we just said Maryland beat USC. They're better than we thought. Minnesota beat USC, right? Michigan State beat Iowa. Just beat Iowa. Illinois is ranked. I do think Rutgers is going to win again. I do believe that. I don't think they're going to go on an 8-game losing streak. The question I have is are they going to win 2? If I had to say which game they're going to win at this point, I would say probably Michigan State. You guys, what do you think?
It's a tough place to play at Michigan State on Thanksgiving weekend. Like everyone's going to be fan base is not going to be juiced for that in the finale. If things go poorly before that, the wheels could completely come off before they get to Michigan State.
No, you're talking me out of it. Thanks, Pat.
I'm not going to give away my USC pick, but they are a disaster. USC is a disaster. Lincoln Riley should be absolutely on the hottest seat in the country.
He is totally okay.
Right. So
Pat's going to pick Rutgers to beat USC.
I'm not there yet. I got to go through the I got to go through the
We'll
process
get there. You'll get there.
I will get there. There's no question I'll get there. I will convince myself. I will convince myself.
You got 3 days to convince yourself.
But yeah, I think USC is a complete shell of itself. What you talk about what Rutgers team is going to show up. You have no idea what you're going to get from USC.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a fork in the road here this Friday. I think if Rutgers wins, some life will be breathed in, some juice will be back. You'll be 5-3 at the bye week, and you can reasonably go into the last 4 games with some hope of 8 wins of salvaging the season. If you lose to USC, you are 4-4 at the bye week. You have a lot of guys who came back for what the NFL for one more year to have a special season. At 4-4, entering the final 4 games of the season, that's going nowhere. Are these guys going to want to play and risk their bodies for a 6-6 year? That to me would be the biggest question. And I think that if they lose to USC, those questions will be raised. And I think, I don't know who or what, I have no intel on this, but I just have to imagine the amount of seniors they have. There's got to be at least a couple or 3 guys who have their eye on the NFL and wouldn't want to, again, risk their bodies in games like that. So I think, to answer your question, in a bit of a cop-out, if they beat USC, I think they could still win 1 or 2 more games after that. If they lose to USC, I think there is a legitimate chance for multiple factors that they might not win another game.
Okay.
If I had to guess, if I had to bet right now, and my bet is not as great as it used to be, we're on Fade Fonseca watch here after 2 straight weeks of absolutely getting dog walked on these picks. But if I had to pick right now, independent of the USC result, they'll win at least 1 of the last 4 games, no matter what. I just cannot see this team ending with 4 wins, but I think it's certainly possible.
There's no question USC will be the most talented team that Rutgers plays down the stretch from a guy's names on paper, but man, I just don't know. I just don't know what you're getting from USC. But it is. I'll save it.
USC competing for the Detroit Bowl is hilarious. This game is like the playing game to get out of Detroit on the day after Christmas. That's what it is. It's great. It's amazing. Can you imagine? Rutgers has a better record than USC, right? The 3-4.
If you were Southern Cal, would you turn down the Detroit Bowl?
Yes,
of course,
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my goodness!
Especially because
going to Detroit. Can you imagine those guys in Detroit? They're like, we take Southern Cal, and they're like, lost. Going back to Michigan.
I'm concerned about USC's give a shit factor for this game, a Friday night in the middle of October. Can you imagine for Detroit the day after Christmas? They'd have to go get students in the plaza to play, tight end because none of their players are going to want to play. Rightfully so.
In the Detroit Bowl,
Southern Cal is above playing in the Detroit Bowl. There are some programs that are just above it. Ohio State will never play in the Detroit Bowl. Oregon will never play in the Detroit Bowl. USC should never, ever, ever play in the Detroit Bowl.
All right, let's talk basketball. Lots of questions of basketball. We will just open up the conversation. Three of us were there for the really fun St. John's exhibition game. That's my biggest takeaway. It was just a blast. Like, I get it. They lost, was it 91-85? Something about losing 91-85 is better than losing 51-45. I think it was just a lot of, it just had a good time. And I get it. They didn't make the plays down the stretch. They lost the game. They were destroyed. I understand all that. But for me, the takeaway was that this is going to be an event every time they play, that Ace Bailey is just ridiculous. You can already tell he's the most talented player to step foot on this campus since Quincy Doobie, at least for me. He's just really, really freaking good. You're shaking your head. That's okay. You'll have a chance to talk. But just overall, it was just a lot of fun. I don't know. I just had a great time. I think this is going to be a team that has a lot to figure out. But I saw an NCAA tournament team. Definitely. Go ahead. Throw the bucket of water, Fonseca. You're standing.
No, I was going to even go further. Ace Bailey's in another stratosphere than Quincy Doobie, than any other player Rutgers has ever had. Right? I think Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper are going to be the best two players that Rutgers has ever had. And I think that was clear to me in high school, and it's clear to me watching them play. And again, a meaningless game, the score doesn't matter, whatever. I think those two guys are the real deal, and that sets a really high floor for Rutgers. I thought the role players played really well. PJ Hayes offensively really encouraged me. Jordan Durkak for flashes defensively really encouraged me. I'll be a broken record here. Center absolutely terrifies me. I guess you're going to be a platoon. You got to hope one of those guys kind of emerges to become a reliable starter. That's the one area I still left with some concerns, but after rewatching the game and thinking about it a few days after, I feel better about Rutgers now than I did the start of last week.
Yeah, I'll just add this to your point about it being fun and the excitement. I spent a lot of time before the game talking to fans as they came into the building, and the thing was the overwhelming message was this might be the only time we get to see those two guys because every game is potentially sold out, right? So they're like, we had to get here to this exhibition game to watch Dylan and Ace Bailey because that could very well be a reality, right?
Right.
That could be if they are a one and done player and they have this amazing season at Rutgers, right? You can say like you saw him, you were there.
Yeah.
I think that adds to the allure of it.
November 6th will be the most hyped Rutgers-Wagner matchup of all time. It will never be matched ever again. The place is going to be electric, I think, from the opening tip, just for people to see these two guys in an official competition for the first time. And they might, it's Wagner, right? They might have a dunk contest by the end of the game. At least you hope so. If you're Rutgers, you don't want that to be a close game. So I think no matter what, barring a collapse, that place is going to be a zoo every single game. And Rutgers fans, I think, are rightfully understanding that this is a unique opportunity they have to enjoy every second of.
Yeah. And it was, watching both of them play, a couple of things stood out. Again, just how young Ace looks. And he is a kid. He's definitely a kid. But man, he's just got a sweet shot. He's not afraid to take the shot. Steve Peichel couldn't, it's an exhibition game. Couldn't keep him off the floor. I think he played 37 minutes. Dylan Harper was gassed. Peichel had to take him out at the end because he couldn't catch his breath. He played the entire game. This is it. If you had any doubt, if you thought, well, so you got to work these kids. No, the team is them from the start of this thing. And everything else just fit the pieces in around them. The one thing I will say about the center position that a little bit encouraging, Martini only played 11 minutes. I don't know if that was they got foul trouble early. If he wants to try some other combinations, I can't imagine like Dirkak's gonna play 29 minutes. I get he's not up front. Boley looked bad, but there's still some hope there rotationally, right? Maybe
Martini left early in the first half because he got 2 fouls in his first 2 minutes in the game. So I think he'll play more than 11 minutes. But I just didn't see anything with Zach Martini against St. John's really good center that makes me believe he can compete against the Big Ten's best centers. They
turned that kid into Will Chamberlain. Yeah, it was something else. Man.
He looked awesome. 10 offensive rebounds is insane.
Yeah.
And the thing with Lathan Somerville is I was encouraged by him offensively. He had a really sweet like fadeaway jumper, but he's never in the paint. Like he's like a center in body, but his play style always seems to be around the perimeter. That to me is a big question with him.
Like Boley was the same way. There was a couple of times I'm watching. I'm like, just stand under the basket, put your arms up. You're 7 foot. Dude, like he's just floating. He's floating away. There's a couple that was I was not expecting. I thought maybe just like the rim protect. Forget Cliff as a offensive player. The rim protection from Cliff Omoruyi is what they're going to miss. I mean, they just got destroyed around the rim. So, but it was overall. Again, I can't say it enough. It's just this is going to be. I don't know, Pat. Do you agree with that statement? At this point. I would be surprised if we're not sitting in March in a comfortable spot. And I'm not talking about a 3 seed. I'm talking about in the tournament. I don't know where in the tournament, but we're not sitting there going, "Oh, they gotta beat Wisconsin." Where they're playing late in the season to get off the bubble. I don't think that's going to be where we're
at. I agree, and you saw everything that was diagnosed preseason kind of played out in that scrimmage, which was almost never happens, but it did. So I was encouraged. I left encouraged. I thought the whole thing, to your fun point, was a great way to put it. After the misery of last season and the offensive ineptitude, that is gone, right? It seemed like there won't be a stretch of going scoreless for 8-9 minutes anymore, right? Like one of these guys is going to do something special to turn it up, and that's incredible.
Ripping Steve Pikiell for offensive coaching. It's much easier when the ball just goes to Ace Bailey. He shoots a 3 and it goes in. Hey, I could coach that. That's some good offense. Good strategy.
Two things they've never had before. A guy you can, like you said, Ace Bailey, give him the ball in his hands, do something, put up a shot, mid-range, 3-pointer, whatever. And Dylan Harper is a bull who, if you put the ball in his hands at the top of the key, I don't think there are many guards in the country that could stay in front of him, and he'll just barrel through them. And he makes some tough finishes. That first basket of the game was a tough finish.
Top of the backboard. Yeah.
To your question earlier, I subscribed to the Max Scheiner, who was a podcast host. He did the RU Screw Pod for a long time, listener of the show. I subscribed to his theory that Steve Pikiell is destined to play bubble ball for the rest of his career at Rutgers. No matter if he has the dream team, we will be in March. They will be 9-9 in the Big Ten, and they'll be scratching, clawing for that Final Four spot in the NCAA tournament. Until I see otherwise, I believe that I fully believe that this team will be on the bubble entering March. You
want to go back to the Red Roof Inn in Dayton. That's all you look for.
I thought he was talking about like Bubble Boy as in like protective, and I was like, this scrimmage, they were diving all over the place. I thought it was like unbelievable how hard they played in that scrimmage.
They were great. They will win games for Rutgers individually, those two guys, no doubt. I'm just not sure they're going to win enough games that we get to March, and it's like, it's a 7 seed in the East Regional. Maybe I think we'll be talking about. I think they'll be in the field, but I think it won't be like signed, sealed, delivered, stamped until the week of Selection Sunday.
One more basketball note that we have to talk about. Now, all of a sudden, Steve Pikiell has the 4th best recruiting class in the country. Did I see that correctly?
Yes.
Tell us about the new 4-star Smoke apparently earning his keep once again. Man, that guy can recruit. What happened?
Coach Smoke has, I believe, been linked to all 4 of their current commits. Rutgers is highly ranked in the 25 rankings, in large part the way that football was ranked really highly for a long time. They just have more commits than practically everybody else, right? They don't have a bunch of 5 stars or 4 stars. They just have 1 4-star in this Chris Newley kid, and who committed yesterday, to be clear, and then 3 3-stars. Chris Newley, I'll give our friends from the Night Report, they kind of broke down his game in a podcast yesterday, and it sounds like a prototypical Steve Pikiell player. Plays hard, can rebound, can finish at the rim. His jump shot is not great. They compared him to Mawot Mag, and I think they're right. That I think if Steve Peichel
Pretty
can
freaking
have
good.
13 watt mags, I think he'd sign up for that immediately. So
he's not getting 13 Ace Baileys, right? So this is the kind of guy he's got to recruit. And beating UCLA, the list of schools he beat out. I don't know how many offers were serious, but it was a good list.
It's hard to tell how many of those offers are committable, right? I mean, he had a top 6 with 6 other teams besides Rutgers. Rutgers offered him last month. He goes on an official visit to Rutgers almost immediately after getting offered, and a month later he commits to Rutgers.
Right.
So that is kind of telling. And listen, if you follow the recruiting rankings or not, everyone kind of takes them as serious as they want to whatever extent. He was a top 15 kid in his class 2 years ago, and the last rankings across almost every network has dropped him into like the 120 range. Still a 4-star, but not a upper echelon kid. I don't know the reasons to that. I haven't talked to the recruiting experts. I don't know if that's alarming particularly, but if you look at it, from this standpoint, he's a 120th ranked kid. That's a top 150 kid. So yes, to recap, Coach Smoke is earning his paycheck, just being prolific as far as the kids he's landing, the amount of kids he's landing, I should say. And Rutgers has another top 10 recruiting class as long as no one else gets 4 of the recruits and catches up to them in sheer numbers.
Well, Rutgers we're going to have 12 scholarships to get. I'm exaggerating, but certainly, yeah, they're going to have they might not be done in this recruiting class either. So,
well, there'll be 15 scholarships next year with the house case, so they'll have more to use.
Yep. He doesn't want to use 15. He doesn't want to use 12 scholarships. Steve,
right.
he kind of gets that. So, yeah,
right.
Anything else, Pat? We've been talking for an hour.
No, let's wrap it up. I'm going to pick Rutgers to beat USC, but if we go another minute, so I want to stop.
Throw some cold water in your face.
I thought Pat would have brought this up. The Rutgers field hockey team yesterday defeats number 3 Ohio
big
State.
Win.
1-0.
Really?
Yes.
Puck Winter scored the goal?
I don't think so. Your favorite player, Puck Winter, did not. I don't think so. I could be wrong. Not a great season to the level they've had recently, but the ladies still got it. They could still pull out a top 5 win. At home, I believe. I don't remember if it was
at home. And so that's 2. I mean, they beat Iowa earlier this season in a shootout.
Are they a tournament team then? They must be.
It's so tough. I was talking to Mrs. Lanny about the selection process for NCAAs, and she reminded me that Princeton just went out and beat Harvard, who was a top 10 team over the weekend as well. And Princeton's going to probably be second in the Ivy League, won't get in.
Really?
Rutgers is probably going to be, I don't know, 3rd in the Big Ten, 3rd or 4th.
Fifth,
maybe. Probably facing an uphill battle to get in, I would think. Just a very, very small field.
Princeton beat Rutgers, right, too?
Princeton beat Rutgers this year, yeah.
What about the women's soccer team? They beat Illinois. Did I see that correctly?
They got back on track. They had a win this weekend. I don't remember who, but I do have the standings in front of me. They are now 5th in the Big Ten with 20 points. They're 8 points behind USC, a wagon with 9 wins, 0 losses, and 1 tie.
So. Awesome. All right. Whew. Good podcast. Good show. Wasn't as dark as the Wisconsin podcast. I thought we were feisty. We talked a little bit. We talked it out. It's like therapy, our show. We should call it the Rutgers therapy session.
The Scarlet Couch.
The Scarlet Couch. Yes, I love it. The Scarlet Couch. That's great. It's called the branding people. Tell the Heldridge they've got good furniture. They'll understand if we're the Scarlet Couch from now on. We'll be back at the end of the week to preview Southern Cal, to make our predictions. We're still here. We're still calling our shot. Thanks for listening. We'll see you at the end of the week.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.